Hello and welcome to Rauta's retrospective videos. As part of the series that I'm doing with the bands I've interviewed, this time it's Memoriam, one of the newer bands. It's very different to go through a band that hasn't been there for 30, 40 years as opposed to something very much younger. But nonetheless, Memoriam has been there out enough of time to really go through it. I mean, it's not like there's like one album ban and all that stuff. So let's tune on for this band which I interviewed already 2017. Now, if you go for a Metal Archive site for Memoriam, you will see more than one band with the same name. Not only two Memoriams, however, and this is also known Memoriam UK, coming from UK as death metal band. Now, when you take a look at this big picture, the overall site for Memoriam, you will see they are death metal with themes like death, loss, war, politics. That's pretty accurate, and I will go through that more detail as we go on. What is also curious is that this band, founded in 2015, already out with 5 albums and then some split singles and whatever, was mostly founded by 2 ex-Bolt Thrower members. And I cannot imagine I was the only one thinking that this could be some kind of a successor to Bolt Thrower, one of the best death metal bands of all time. After all, it featured, and I'm using this in past tense, both the vocalist of Bolt Thrower as well as the ex-drummer of Bolt Thrower. We will see the members list in a bit, but first, quick glance here overall. Now, operating as 4-man band, there are 3 original members and a new drummer. New being very relevant term here, or so much more like, well, you'll figure it out. But what matters is that, this band has been active very early days, since the beginning. I mean, already 2016 and 2017, they made interesting demos. That's when I got hooked, like, I'm interested. They made good stuff and didn't really bother me as a Bolt Thrower fan, that they had these ex-Bolt Thrower members. And then they started doing albums and all that stuff. But as promised, let's take a quick look at the members list. I think past members is the place to go because Andrew Whale, or Andy Whale, from Bolt Thrower and other bands, of course, was the original drummer for the band and was there for a few years, from 2015 and onwards. Current lineup is that with Frank Healy, mostly I guess known for his long career in Benediction, another death metal legend from UK, as well as other bands like Napalm Death and so forth. Sacrilege is a key element here to mention because nowadays their drummer Spiky T. Smith, not so much known for metal in terms of overall look at his bands, but there are these connections like being ex-drummer of Sacrilege as well. So there is this connection. Now, Scott Fairfax, as far as I know, is the main songwriter, at least main guitarist of the band, being the only guitarist in the band. And he has connections through other bands, including Benediction Live, as well as, Cerebral Fix, the old thrash metal band from UK, and so on. And then there is, of course, the vocalist Carl Willets, the voice of Bolt Thrower, apart from one album, mind you. So you might now make these connections. So Frank Healy probably got Spiky T. Smith, hey, ex-members and all that to work with these. And of course, Carl Willets from, Bolt Thrower, as well as Andrew Whale. There was this Bolt Thrower connection. So to put it like simplified, you would have, old legends from the UK scene to form up a new band. Would you call it as far as a supergroup? Well, yeah, in case you are calling a lot of those veteran black metal band supergroups. But, it is what it is. What is funny, though, that everybody else except Scott Fairfax are like 50 plus. So these are really veterans of the scene, not some new guys. And even Scott Fairfax is almost as old as me, so closing to 50 soon enough. So this is the lineup, and with this kind of legendary people in the band, what can you expect from the music? Well, classic death metal. But there's also a twist, and we'll go on with that when we go through the albums, as well as talk about the lyrics and all that stuff. Now, after their demos, especially the Hellfire demos too, which I really liked, 2017 was the time for the first album, For the Fallen. Now, this is already a title, including the cover, that you kind of takes you to the world of Bolt Thrower. Different but same, or at least similar to a degree. I mean, Bolt Thrower was all about war and history and, in a certain degree, politics related to that, but mostly about war and battles. So Memoriam, with this kind of a cover, which is very much like, okay, you have this ruined city of swords and you have people carrying Casket or whatever. I mean, it's not that far from Bolt Thrower, especially the early days when the, cover images were quite fantasy inspired. Sci-fi, to say the least. With the songs they had, quick glimpse already kind of I can reveal what we're talking about. War rages on, reduced to zero, especially if you read the lyrics, resistance, and so on. So all these topics talked about here are very, very much like, Bolt Thrower reminiscent. So it's pretty cool, right? Musically, there are lots of similarities, but also differences. Mostly it's about kind of a mid-tempo, tank rolling on kind of a death metal. And that's already what got me hooked for this particular album back in the days. But there are differences, mainly due to Scott Fairfax's style of doing guitars. They're like melodies which are very different from Bolt Thrower. So while you could call it on the surface level mid-tempo death metal with melodies, and that can instantaneously put you into the world map of Bolt Thrower, you can pretty figure out it's not exactly the same. But there are similarities, and of course it helps when you have ex-Bolt Thrower drummer and ex-Bolt Thrower vocalist doing the job. Good album, for sure, but just different, and in my opinion, didn't really reach the heights of Bolt Thrower, but then again, it's really next to impossible, being one of the best death metal bands of all time. Now, the second album, Silent Vigil, came only a year after that. And obviously I had high hopes for this one because it was supposed to be more of the same, but no, with a new album. And this was a big letdown for me. I'm not going to deny it. Once again, the cover is very much taking a look at this some kind of a world in a brink of war or destruction, and also these kind of a fantastic elements. I don't really know what to think about this album because I don't like the colorscape here, but I mean, as a picture, it's pretty cool, but as much as the picture shows, it's almost like a warning. This is not for the Fallen Part 2. For me, this was a kind of like a major sidestep in a wrong way. Technically speaking, it's roughly the same. Once again, mid-tempo death metal, very crushing riffs and melodies and all that stuff, but there are so many things that are a little bit off. First of all, Carl Willett's vocals are the weakest throughout his career, ever. I don't know what was wrong, but to me it sounds like as he was going through some flu or whatever. Maybe uninspired. I don't know. You can't blame it on age, as you can pretty much find out later on. We go on with this one. But more importantly, it's about the songs that seem so uninspired versus the first album. It's almost like these are the bad leftover tracks. It's not like this album is bad, but compared to the first one, it's a big drop. And it was a big letdown for me back in 2018 when it came out and I got this for review. And now that I've been listening to it a couple of times before making this video, I still feel the same. Maybe I'm not shocked as much as back in 2018. That's 7 years ago. But yeah, it was like, man, this wasn't exactly what I was signing up for. So it made me very cautious about what would come on later on. Now it's worth mentioning that I got to interview the band in 2017. So around the first album. This came out in March, but the interview took place, if I remember correctly, in September 2017. So when they played the show, they would obviously play the songs from the first album only, as well as a couple of Bolt Thrower ones, like Spearhead. And I was blown away. Seeing Bolt Thrower a couple of times really made my love just bigger with that stuff. So when I got to see them live, it was before Silent Vigil. So obviously I wouldn't be disappointed with that, but that's part of the game here. Now with the third album that came only 1 year after the second one, Requiem for Mankind. Obviously my expectations were a little less due to the second album being what it is. And this was a massive positive surprise once again. I mean, surprise first, being disappointed, and then surprise being, hey, happily. Now here it is once again with the kind of sci-fi war themes, or fantasy for that matter. I think there's a kind of a very strong Warhammer 40,000 feeling with this cover for some reason. Yeah, blame it on Bolt Thrower once again. Now Requiem for Mankind is totally different in terms of quality and even to a degree in songwriting too. Because while it kind of maintains the same basic idea, once again mostly in the mid-tempo section, singing about war, heavy and all that stuff, everything is better. Whether we're talking about production or vocals or songwriting, it's clearly, so much better. It's almost like this would have been the successor for the first album. I don't know, obviously, what changed within the band. I wasn't there in the room or the rehearsal place or whatever, But it seems like where For the Fallen was a good debut, the second one was a disappointing one, third album, which is usually the so-called hard one, you figure out where you want to go with the band. Suddenly this was way much more like after the debut. Maybe it is the theory what I mentioned, which seems to be true in some cases. The second album is using the leftovers of the first album, where with the third album it's more like a restart. Sometimes that's exactly the reason why it's called the hard one. Now, through this album of the 10 songs and all, once again, the themes are very, very obvious. Shell shock or the veteran and things like that. The topics are once again very much dealing with the same things. And I will get into more detail about the lyrics later on. This was indeed a very, very good album. And now I actually think it's the best one. Whereas originally I thought For the Fallen, was that was the thing, and Requiem was not so much. Maybe it was me just adjusting my review scoring, like being a little bit more, not overly praising or anything. But these days I would just, change the scores between the first and third album. So Requiem for Mankind fixed all the problems they had with the second one, and even improving from the first one. And that's why I think it's the album you should go for if you're starting with, Memoriam for the first time. It took only 2 years more to continue with the story, and this time to the end. Once again, the war theme with kind of a sci-fi look, or you could say a little bit Sodom in the mix, is right there. Once again, I wouldn't be surprised if you're thinking a little bit like preceding to, something like Warhammerish, but it's almost like combination of somewhat, old and, the past and something very futuristic. And the color seem to be changing from album to album. It's pretty interesting because it's always kind of similar, but the themes change, except for the lyrics, which are very, very same once again here. You can see the war themes and battle themes once again with the song titles. Onwards into battle. The war is won. Through the end in a way, and all that stuff. There are some songs which are not outright war, and that's a story which I will once again mention with the lyrics. Then 2 years later, and that's where my theory goes south. I was thinking with the third album, it's going to be like the first one, the uneven ones, the ones and threes and fives and so on, they would be the good boulder ones, whereas, the even ones, not the odd ones, would be the ones that are not going to do the trick. Because so far, that seemed to be the thing here. For the Fallen, good. The Silent Vigil, nah. Requiem for Mankind, yay! And to the end, yeah, it's better than Silent Vigil, but not nowhere near to the first and third one. So with Rise to Power, I was thinking, now it must be, once again, the really good one, because, once again, we're talking about the odd ones. Rise to Power, however, seems to be more like a successor to the fourth album. There are lots of similarities in style, and now it seems more like they have finally figured out what they're doing and the way they want to do it. There are not too many changes, be it production, be it vocals and all that stuff. I would say Rise to Power is very, very much continuing the path what they started with the previous ones. And if you look at once again the cover, you have the fantastic things, you have the sci-fi things, and you have the war things. So it's the ongoing theme, but also the cover, with the color is once again changed from the beginning. And then there are these topics: total war, I am the enemy, the conflict is within, annihilation's dawn. Those themes are quite obvious if you think about the band in question, about the war, battles, history, and so on. So once I mentioned that my theory went south, I don't know what to expect, whatever they are going to come up with after the fifth album. Because now in hindsight, given these albums multiple listens, I think Requiem for the Mankind is their peak moment at the moment, For the Fallen being the second one. For To the End and Rise to Power, I'm kind of undivided. They are for me the same level. I cannot really decide at this point which one is clearly the better. Sometimes it could change from day to day. One thing is for sure, and I can say this out loud, Silent Vigil is still the most disappointing album by Memoriam. Like I said, I wouldn't call it bad, but it's very close to mediocrity, whereas at least To the End and Rise to Power have some more decent stuff going on. And while the vocals have been pretty much the same from the beginning, there are changes. And like I said, Silent Vigil has the weakest ones, whereas Requiem and I guess these later two ones have more power to it. And when it comes to the riffs, there are lots of hit and miss moments with the songwriting. Mostly it's good, but there are moments where I feel like, why on earth would you create that kind of a riff and put it on an album? These are, of course, matters of taste. And one thing is worth noting, what I mentioned here beginning, is the drummer changes in 2020. So these two later albums clearly sound different if you pay attention to the drumming. Now, as much as I'm a big Bolt Thrower fan, I gotta say the drumming is better with these two later albums than in the beginning. So as much as I have, appreciation for Andy Whale, for his drumming, both in Bolt Thrower and Memoriam, I think the new drummer, not the young guy anymore, but still, he plays it more interestingly. Just my opinion, what it's worth. And when I was talking about the lyrics, this doesn't make sense if I'm gonna go you through with showing the lyrics. You can pretty much read it on yourself. I'm just gonna recap it here. What is for mentioning is that it's mostly about battles and wars, and of course, with that kind of stuff related to history and death, loss. It's kind of a pessimistic and cynical take with a hint of optimism in the game, and I think that's pretty much just going on with the same themes that Bolt Thrower pretty much had. Obviously, when you mature and see more world and learn more things will change. One thing is worth noting, and this doesn't bother most of the people or doesn't concern most of the people, it's worth mentioning if you are interested. Politics are mentioned here, and yeah, there are a few songs which are outright political, straight from the beginning. I use this as a good example, this Never Forget, Never Again, 6 Million Dead. This is about World War II and, annihilation of Jewish people. Obviously, it's a statement against the Nazi things going 1940s. And there is at least one other song which is even more vocal about it, being very, very openly left-wing leaning, or more like against the right-wing thing. So if you're still undecided, can you or should you be listening to that one? Now you know. And what it's worth, once again, at least Carl Willits mentioned in an interview I did with him that he is very much like Antifa, or at least very much to the liberal left-wing side of things. So if you're concerned about politics, this is probably something you should know. I personally don't care if there is politics. I don't really resonate with that much. I'm more interested in the war and battle related lyrics, but I think it's an important thing that they are showing their colors and putting them on the map, like, hey, we think about that. So I can't really disagree what they're singing. And I think in general, Memoriam's lyrics are among the better ones in terms of death metal. I like how they deal with political takes, or war, death, loss, battles, the kind of a cynicism and all that stuff with the lyrics. So I think they are actually quite pleasant to read. I'm not going to call them best death metal lyrics of all time, but definitely on the better side of things. So yeah, I am enjoying what they're doing, but I'm not as big of a fan as, say, Bolt Thrower, obviously. So for me, when it comes to my personal record collection, so far I only decided to keep Requiem for Mankind, because it's the only one that is the real good one, and the rest, they're decent, but I can live with the streaming only. That's just my opinion. Yours might be very, very different. So 10 years in, 5 albums in, it's pretty interesting to see how long these guys will be doing what they are doing, and if they will evolve at this age. I mean, they are more or less around 60 on average when it comes to the age. So it's not a young man's game anymore. But it's an interesting band nonetheless, and if you get the chance to see them alive, go do it. Of course, I will personally suggest you to check out my interview with them in 2017. That will be linked to the very end of this particular video. Now, if you have some questions or comments about the band, let me know in the comment section and I will get back to you. I hope you like these retrospective videos. There will be more coming out of the same series about the bands I have interviewed. So next, again, something from 2017 in terms of interviews. Stay tuned for more death metal.